Essentially, you get all of the all of the dangers of controlling a system concentrated in the most centralized way possible. So there's a big push right now from the ECB and the Bank of England saying, hey, this, if when we roll out our digital pound or digital euro, it's not going to be programmable. But that's a misunderstanding about what a CBDC is. By nature, it is programmable. Now, what they're trying to communicate is that we won't program it to change it and use it to benefit us. But that's a very different thing than saying it's not programmable. By definition, it is programmable because it is programmed. And so you have, like, right now we have the issue of, like I said, businesses maybe getting pushed out by banks. Well, now all that is concentrated into one. And so if somebody decides at the central bank that it is a risk to economic stability for any specific action, they could immediately prevent that action from taking place. And so, like, for instance, most central banks are tasked with controlling inflation. And so if they look and they see their transactions now, they're not looking at the general level of inflation. They're looking at individual prices of everything because they have all that data now. And they see prices of fuel going up. They doubled in the last month, let's say. They could look at that and say, hey, that is going to be an issue for economic stability. And our job is to prevent inflation. So we need to stop transactions from happening after a certain amount for fuel, because then that will put a cap on the price, because you cut off demand, you cut off the price rise. So they could institute in real time a ration on fuel in order to save the economy, in order to prevent inflation. And that's just one example. They could literally stop any transaction from taking place, reverse any transaction from taking place in order to stimulate spending. They could give everybody $1,000 that would be, that would expire after a month. They could actually delete money from people's accounts if they wanted to, because people had too much money and they were causing inflation. They could put a wealth cap in place where if somebody had more than $1 million, any new transactions that come into the account just disappear. So it is pure 100% tyrannical control over the financial system. And the thing to understand about money is that it's one half of everything that everybody does. There is no action that people take in the course of our day-to-day lives that do not involve a financial transaction. We go home to a house that we're paying for, in a car that we're paying for, with fuel that we're paying for, paid for with, we've got insurance that we're paying for on it. We go out to eat, we pay for it. We go groceries, we go out on a date, we go to work, exchange our time for money. Literally everything that everybody does all day long, one half of that is money. So if you can control 100% the money, you can influence all human behavior. It is 100% tyrannical control over a system. And just because they say they won't use it in a bad way is no guarantee that it won't utterly fail, because power corrupts, and the more power a system has, the more it will attract the people who want to use that power for their own benefit. And so it is just, regardless of the incentives or the benefits that system will have, the dangers far outweigh any advantages.
I know that sentence and that sentiment is a very American thing, that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. You hear it very often. I like the sentiment of freedom also. And what you talk right now, I want to just make it clear to the viewers. You talked more about the economic aspects now, but nobody says that it will be only that area. We know, like, the famous examples of social credit scores. It's like, oh, they're gonna ration this because of inflation. Well, yeah, maybe, but also maybe you get a deduction or some fine because you talked to this wrong person, because you posted the wrong stuff, because you did something that this government does not like. Just like that, it's easy, because once the system is in place and once it's normal and widespread, it can, I'm not saying it will, but it can be used that way. And as you say, it's like, if you look at the history, the last 1,000 years, the last 2,000 years, if the government can do something, it's like easier that it does it. Like when I was back in the military, for example, it was like, if you if you don't lock up your stuff, you get a punishment because you made someone a thief, because you made it possible for him to steal from your stuff. And it's like with the government the same. If you give them the chance, you know, who are they to not take advantage of that chance, of those possibilities that they have? So I understand that sentiment and that issue a lot, because it's not like it's just a fairy tale idea. We've seen things that come close to this happening in the last few years. Like, as you say, banks shutting down because they don't like specific kind of industries or shops. You in America, for example, have a big discussion about the Second Amendment. For the views out of Europe, it's the discussion about having the right to own arms, guns, weapons, and so on, to protect yourself, with the idea that you're also supposed to protect yourself against a tyrannical government. So the discussion of the government wanting to make it harder to get them is, of course, splitting the American people apart. But also examples like in Canada with the trucker protests, where suddenly accounts were frozen. We've seen it in China where stuff got frozen. We've seen it now with the Ukraine and Russia crisis, of course, in a much larger scale, but also like in the small scale where, for example, well, you're a wealthy Russian, we think you're in connection with Putin, you're one of his big thugs, so we're gonna seize your stuff and we're gonna freeze your accounts. We in Austria, for example, had for a few years ago a terror attack from a specific group. And there it was also, okay, we're going to go through X accounts, we're going to freeze them, we're going to look at who has done what to get to the bottom of things. Well, how widespread will that be used? I think it's very much of a trust issue with many political topics nowadays. Weirdly, it's like people don't trust the governments anymore. Like a few decades ago, people were more like, I think they'll be all right. They won't take advantage of it. It will work out. They wouldn't be like this evil. And nowadays, somehow the sentiment is more like, oh man, the moment they can, they will. So it's interesting to see how that changed. If you like this clip, watch another one. And if you want to see the whole interview, click here.